Listen carefully, for you are about to hear a truth that most men stumble through their entire lives without truly understanding. We believe ourselves to be rational creatures, weighing evidence, making choices freely, standing upright in the dignity of our own autonomy. Yet what if the greatest manipulators of men do not storm the gates or crack the whip? What if the chains that bind us most securely are those we ourselves have polished to gleam like jewelry? After spending years observing power, how it flows, how it stagnates, how it corrupts and elevates, something becomes clear. The most devastating tool of control is not the sword, but the hand extended in apparent kindness. The manipulator who gives is far more dangerous than the tyrant who takes, because the one who takes makes his tyranny visible, while the one who gives creates a temple of gratitude where chains are mistaken for garlands. Consider this. When a prince supplies his soldiers with weapons, they know they have received a weapon. Their eyes are open. But when he supplies them with comfort, with provision, with the knowledge that their family will be secure only through his continued benevolence, then something far more subtle has occurred. A debt has been created that cannot be repaid, for it attaches itself not to a single gift, but to the entirety of one's being. The soldier who receives a sword can lose it, but the soldier who has learned to need his master cannot shed that need as easily as a coat. This is not written from a position of moral judgment, as though standing outside these mechanisms and condemning them. Rather, this is written as an understanding that this is how power truly operates beneath the surface of respectability. In understanding it, you gain the clarity to either wield it or protect yourself from it, or perhaps, if you are wise, to do both. The generosity that creates dependence is an art form. It is subtle, patient, and devastatingly effective. Let this be explained. First, understand this fundamental truth. Dependency is not born from deprivation alone. A man who starves may steal or flee, but a man who is fed just enough to survive, just enough to feel cared for, who receives precisely those provisions he has learned to desire, this man becomes a masterpiece of manipulation. The hunger must not be eliminated entirely. That is the great error amateurs make. They give too much too quickly, and the recipient either escapes the orbit of gratitude or demands increase faster than the giver can supply. No, the true master of this art maintains a precise equilibrium. There is always a slight hunger, a small uncertainty, a tender place of need that the benefactor alone can soothe. The victim is never quite certain whether the next gift will arrive, which keeps him perpetually attentive, perpetually grateful when it does, perpetually anxious when it does not. Think of it as an invisible lyre. The manipulator knows exactly which strings to pluck. Give the man a sum of gold, and he thinks himself fortunate. Give it to him again next month, and he begins to expect it. Give it to him irregularly, now abundantly, now sparingly, and he becomes enslaved not by its presence, but by its uncertainty. He will abandon his pride, his other opportunities, his very sense of self, all to maintain access to this unpredictable fountain. Because what is inconsistent feels less like obligation and more like love. Inconsistency creates the illusion of genuine emotion rather than calculated arrangement. This is where generosity becomes diabolical. True generosity would be reliable, predictable, and free. But the generosity of the manipulator is a performance. It carries conditions that are never quite stated aloud. The gift is given, it says silently, and therefore you are mine, not by contract, but by the weight of my gift pressing upon your conscience. Consider the prince who gives land to his nobles. They're grateful, yes, but gratitude is the beginning, not the end. The moment he gives, he has established a relationship wherein the taking away becomes a form of punishment. The noble now has something to lose. And fear of loss is a far stronger motivator than the memory of gain. This has been observed countless times. A man will work harder to keep what he has been given than he ever worked to earn it himself. The gift transforms his nature. It makes him small. It makes him dependent. Yet here is where the genius of this manipulation lies. The victim rarely experiences himself as controlled. He experiences himself as fortunate. He may even feel a sense of pride in being chosen for such generosity. The master has, through calculated kindness, performed a miracle of psychology. He has made captivity feel like privilege. And the victim will defend this arrangement. Ask him about the one from whom he receives, and watch how passion rises to his defense. You misunderstand, he will say. This is not dependence. This is loyalty. This is love. The manipulation is so complete that the very language used to describe it becomes corrupted. Words lose their meaning. Dependence is called devotion. Control is called care. This is the invisible art that separates the great manipulators from the merely cruel. Now, this must deepen further, for the mechanisms of dependence through apparent generosity are far more intricate than surface observation reveals. The manipulator who understands true power does not merely give. He gives strategically, and he gives in such a way that each gift compounds the previous one, creating a structure of obligation that becomes increasingly difficult to escape. Consider this. The first gift is often made when the recipient is vulnerable. Perhaps he faces a difficulty, a moment of genuine need. The giver arrives like Providence itself, offering relief. The recipient is grateful because the timing is perfect. He has felt the sting of deprivation. But here is the crucial element. The giver now owns not merely the gift itself, but the memory of the recipient's vulnerability. This memory becomes a permanent part of their relationship. The recipient knows that this man saw him weak, and in that weakness, chose to help. This creates a unique form of shame intertwined with gratitude. From this foundation, the manipulator builds. The second gift is slightly larger, or more valuable in a subtle way. Perhaps it addresses not just the immediate need, but also a hidden desire the recipient had not expressed. How could the giver know? Only through attentiveness and through care. And it is here that the victim begins to feel truly seen, truly valued. The gifts are no longer merely transactional. They feel like evidence of a deep connection. But notice what has happened. The recipient is now unable to entirely separate the giver's care from the giver's power. They have become entangled. To reject future gifts feels ungrateful, even cruel. To accept them feels like a form of consent to an ongoing relationship. And as the gifts continue, as they grow more perfectly calibrated to the recipient's desires and vulnerabilities, the recipient finds that his entire emotional landscape has been redecorated by another hand. The most sublime aspect of this architecture is that it is not static. It evolves. As the recipient adjusts to the new level of provision, his expectations adjust with it. The manipulator then has a choice: to continue at the present level, allowing comfort to harden into expectation, or to occasionally withdraw slightly. The withdrawal, when it comes, is experienced as genuine deprivation, far worse than if the larger gift had never been offered. And the recipient's desperate gratitude, when the provision returns, is proportionally deeper. This is the mechanism of addiction, you understand, but spoken of as power users have understood it for millennia. The true dependence is not on the substance itself, but on the relationship to the one who provides it. The giver has become necessary to the recipient's emotional equilibrium. And no force, no law, no rational argument can easily break such bonds. Something that most moralists refuse to acknowledge. This system can persist indefinitely because it is not without benefits to the recipient. He does receive goods. His life may genuinely be more comfortable than it would have been without the giver's intervention. His sense of belonging, of being valued, may be deeply real. But this is precisely what makes it so dangerous. The prison that is also a home is harder to escape than the prison that is merely a prison. The victim may even experience a kind of pride. There is one who favors me, he might say. The important man remembers me. He thinks of me. He gives to me. He may not recognize that what he is experiencing is a beautiful repackaging of ownership. Here is a paradox that will illuminate everything that follows. The giver appears to be the powerful one, and in one sense, he is. He controls the flow of goods. He decides when to give and when to withdraw. He orchestrates the entire symphony. Yet there exists a subtle inversion of power that few notice. Consider the man who has given much to another. He has invested in this person, not merely resources, but attention, strategy, emotional labor. He has woven himself into the fabric of this person's life. Now, what is his position? He cannot simply abandon his creation. To do so would be to admit his investment was wasted, or worse, to acknowledge his own cruelty. The giver becomes bound by his own manipulation. There have been princes trapped by their own generosity. They have given so much to certain favorites that they cannot remove their support without appearing contradictory, without exposing themselves as calculating. The relationship has become real to them as well. The lines between calculated strategy and genuine feeling have blurred. This is the genius of long-term manipulation. It corrupts the manipulator as much as the manipulated. Both become trapped in an elaborate dance neither can easily abandon. So there exists a strange interdependence, does there not? The dependent man needs his benefactor for sustenance and validation. But the benefactor, equally, needs his dependent to justify his own sense of power and importance. He is a gardener who has spent years cultivating a particular plant, and he cannot abandon it without abandoning part of himself. Yet the dependent still possesses less power because he possesses less freedom. At any moment, his benefactor could theoretically walk away. The dependent cannot do the same, for he has no resources of his own. This asymmetry, however subtle, remains the core of the manipulation. When the dependent man feels the first stirrings of doubt, when he begins to wonder if his benefactor's gifts are truly given from affection, or if they are merely calculated moves in a grand game of power, what does he do? In most cases, he suppresses this doubt. Why? Because to acknowledge it would require him to examine his own complicity. He would have to recognize that he has permitted himself to be placed in this position. He would have to acknowledge his own weakness. Most men would rather live in the comfortable illusion than face this truth. And should he ever dare to question his benefactor, asking perhaps why a gift was delayed, or why it was smaller than expected, what response does he receive? Often, it is one of wounded surprise. After all that has been done, the benefactor might say, "You question the generosity? You suspect the motives?" The benefactor's hurt is often performed with such perfection that it becomes real. And the dependent man, who has already surrendered the moral high ground by accepting dependence, finds himself in the impossible position of apologizing for his own suspicions. This is a masterwork of manipulation. The benefactor creates a situation in which any resistance by the dependent becomes, in appearance, an act of ingratitude. The very act of seeking independence is transformed into betrayal. Something equally important must be addressed. How does this manipulation appear to those outside standing at a distance from the relationship? This is crucial, for the manipulator's power depends not only on the victim's belief, but on the broader community's belief as well. To external observers, the relationship appears admirable. Here is a generous man, giving to those less fortunate. Here is a loyal recipient, showing proper gratitude. The beauty of this system is that it can be displayed publicly. The giver's reputation is enhanced. He appears magnanimous, powerful, generous. The recipient appears wise to cultivate such an important relationship. The entire arrangement seems like a model of mutual benefit. Should anyone dare to suggest that something sinister underlies this arrangement, they are seen as cynical, as suspicious, as perhaps jealous of the relationship between giver and receiver. The victims of manipulation often become the most vociferous defenders of their manipulators, precisely because to admit the truth would shatter their self-image. This has been observed countless times in courts and cities. The man who is being slowly robbed of his autonomy stands beside his robber and proclaims that he is the most fortunate man alive to be so favored. And the crowd, seeing the giver's apparent generosity and the receiver's apparent contentment, nods in approval. A perfect system. Everyone seems to win. Except, of course, for the recipient's soul. He has, in small increments, surrendered something precious. His sense of being a fully actualized human being, capable of providing for himself, of making autonomous choices, of standing upright without another's support. This is the profound cruelty of this form of manipulation. It destroys its victim so gradually that the victim often praises the destruction. The dependent man may not even be aware that something has been taken from him. He may only feel a vague and persistent sense of incompleteness, a nagging awareness that he is not quite whole. He may attribute this to his own deficiencies, rather than to the subtle, invisible architecture of control that has been constructed around him. And the manipulator, what does he feel? Sometimes genuine affection mixed with contempt. Sometimes pure calculation masked as feeling. More often, a complex mixture of both, so intertwined that even he cannot fully disentangle them. He has become addicted to the power of being needed. He has built an identity around his role as provider. To relinquish this role would be to relinquish a crucial part of himself. Thus both parties are trapped, though they do not recognize it. They are locked in a dance that neither orchestrated entirely, that has taken on a life of its own, and that can only end in either a gradual dissolution or a catastrophic rupture. Consider something delicate, the possibility of escaping this arrangement. For there are men who at some point in their dependence become aware of its true nature. Something shifts. Perhaps a moment of clarity arrives, or perhaps the manipulation becomes too obvious, the pretense too thin. What happens then? The escape is far more difficult than one might imagine. It is not a simple matter of walking away. The dependent man has been, in many cases, deliberately kept from developing other skills, other relationships, other sources of sustenance. He may lack the confidence to survive independently. More crucially, he has internalized the narrative that his benefactor has constructed. He may believe, at some deep level, that he is incapable of thriving without this support, that he is fortunate to be so cared for, that his dependence is actually a form of wisdom, because it allows him to focus on other areas while being relieved of the burden of self-sufficiency. The manipulator, anticipating this possibility, has often made subtle moves to deepen this belief. He may have over time convinced the dependent man that the outside world is hostile, that independence is dangerous, that only within the safety of this relationship can he truly flourish. The world is cruel, he whispers, but this protection will always remain. Should the dependent man attempt to leave, he is often met with escalated versions of the same tactics. The benefactor may become injured, appearing suddenly vulnerable, which triggers the dependent man's sense of obligation. Or the benefactor may transform entirely, revealing a cruel side that had been carefully hidden. After all that has been given, he might say, you repay this with betrayal? Then see what true deprivation looks like. But more often, the most effective barrier to escape is the dependent man's own sense of guilt. He has been given so much. To leave feels like the basest ingratitude. He will torture himself with this guilt, wondering if his desire for independence is selfish, if he owes it to his benefactor to remain. The guilt becomes an interior chain more secure than any exterior lock. And yet, one must pause and observe this with genuine respect for the human spirit. There are those who do escape. There are men who, through some combination of courage, clarity, and desperation, manage to break free. What enables this? Often, it is the arrival of a crisis that shatters the illusion completely. The benefactor's mask slips. Some act of cruelty occurs that cannot be explained away or justified. Or sometimes it is slower. The dependent man simply accumulates enough small moments of doubt that the edifice of justification can no longer support itself. The escape, when it comes, is often painful. There is genuine loss. The dependent man may lose not only the material provision, but also the sense of being special, of being chosen, of belonging to someone. He must rebuild his sense of self from fragments. He must learn to trust his own judgment again. He must absorb the shocking knowledge that much of what he felt was carefully orchestrated. But there is also an exhilaration in the escape. For the first time in years, perhaps, the man experiences his own agency. He makes choices not because they are prescribed to him, but because he has decided they are right. He owns his own time, his own effort, his own becoming. This freedom, hard-won and painful as it is, possesses a taste that the never-dependent man can scarcely imagine. Let us now step back and consider this phenomenon from a higher vantage point. What is truly being enacted in these relationships of manipulative generosity? What does it reveal about human nature, about power, about the structure of society itself? This manipulation exploits something fundamental: the human need to feel valued, to feel chosen, to feel as though we matter to someone. We are not, despite our pretenses, creatures of pure reason. We are creatures who desperately wish to be loved, to be remembered, to be seen as worthy of care. The manipulator who understands this knows that he does not need to force compliance through violence or explicit threats. He needs only to feed these deepest hungers, and compliance will follow naturally. Moreover, this manipulation plays upon the deep human ambivalence about freedom itself. We speak of freedom as though we all desire it absolutely. But this is not entirely true. Freedom is terrifying. Freedom requires that we take responsibility for our own choices, our own failures, our own becoming. It is far easier to surrender this burden to another, to allow someone else to make the decisions while we enjoy the comfort of not being responsible for outcomes. The benefactor offers not merely goods, but an escape from the anxiety of freedom. He offers the illusion of being cared for, of being guided, of belonging to a larger order. And this is genuinely valuable, which is why so many accept it willingly. Yet there is a loss inherent in this exchange. The loss is subtle because it occurs gradually, like the fading of light at dusk. The man slowly ceases to imagine what he might become if left to his own devices. His sense of his own potential shrinks. He begins to define himself not by what he might achieve, but by what he has been given. His worth becomes external rather than internal. He becomes, in the deepest sense, diminished. This is why it was said earlier that this manipulation corrupts both parties. The manipulator, too, loses something. He loses the possibility of genuine connection, because any real relationship requires a degree of equality. He gains power, yes, but power without the possibility of genuine understanding or mutual respect is a hollow thing. The manipulator often surrounds himself with people who cannot speak truthfully to him, because to do so would risk losing the benefits they depend upon. He is in his own way, imprisoned by his own manipulations. Understanding this should breed in us not contempt but clarity. This is simply how human relationships often function beneath their surface pretenses. To see this clearly is to be freed from naivety without necessarily becoming cynical. So there has been laid bare before you the mechanisms of this particular form of power. But now the question must be asked: what will you do with this knowledge? Some of you will recognize yourselves in these descriptions. You will see, perhaps for the first time, the patterns that have governed your relationships, the small ways in which you have been made dependent, the comfortable chains that you have worn so long that you have forgotten what freedom feels like. And for some, this recognition will be agonizing. To see clearly what we have denied is a form of death, but it is also a form of birth. Others of you may recognize yourselves in the role of the manipulator. You may see, with some discomfort, the ways in which you have wielded generosity as a tool of control. And here there will be no condemnation, for judgment is the province of priests and fools. This only will be said: consider whether the power you have gained through this method is truly worth the cost. For you have gained dominion over others at the expense of the possibility of genuine connection, genuine respect, genuine love. You have made yourself necessary, but not truly needed. And in this world where all things eventually crumble, necessity without genuine love is a brittle foundation. But a wish exists to speak to all of you, victim and manipulator alike, of something deeper. There is a way of living that transcends this entire dynamic. It is difficult. It requires courage. But it is possible. It begins with this recognition that we each possess within ourselves the capacity to provide for ourselves. Not merely materially, though this is part of it, but spiritually, emotionally, psychologically. We have been taught to doubt this capacity. We have been told that we need others, that we are incomplete without them. And while it is true that we are social creatures and that connection is necessary, there is a difference between needing connection and needing to be dependent. The man who refuses this dance, who accepts generosity without allowing it to create obligation, who gives without expecting future compliance, who knows his own worth and does not require external validation to sustain it. Such a man has discovered something that most kings do not possess. He has discovered freedom, not the false freedom of isolation, but the genuine freedom of choice made from a position of strength rather than weakness. How is this accomplished? There is no formula, but this can be said: it begins with honesty, honest recognition of where you are, honest acknowledgement of what has been done to you or what you have done to others. It continues with the slow, difficult work of rebuilding your sense of your own capabilities. It requires that you test yourself in small ways, that you discover that you are capable of providing for yourself, that you can survive and even thrive without the particular benefactor or dependent you have become accustomed to. And perhaps most importantly, it requires that you learn to distinguish between genuine love and its counterfeit. Genuine love wishes for the loved one's growth and independence. It strengthens rather than weakens. It elevates rather than diminishes. It can be given and received without creating obligation or debt. Counterfeit love, the love that manipulators offer, always comes with a price that becomes apparent only as you struggle to pay it. This does not counsel you to distrust all generosity or reject all help. That would be its own form of bondage, a reaction so extreme that it simply reverses the problem without solving it. Rather, you are encouraged to see clearly, to observe the patterns, to notice when a gift begins to come with invisible strings, to recognize when you are being positioned as smaller than you truly are. And perhaps if you develop this clarity, you might also use it wisely, not to harm others, but to ensure that your own relationships are based on genuine equality, genuine respect, and genuine choice. You might give without creating obligation. You might receive without surrendering your autonomy. You might love without needing to control, and be loved without needing to be controlled. This is difficult. It is easier to surrender to the familiar dynamics, to continue in the patterns we know. But it has been found that the most interesting men are not those who passively accept the world as it is presented to them. They are those who see clearly, who understand the mechanisms of power and psychology, and who choose deliberately how they will participate in these ancient dances. This leaves you with one thought: the generosity that asks for nothing in return, not even gratitude, not even loyalty, not even memory, is so rare that when you encounter it, you will know it. And should you become the kind of person who can offer such generosity, you will have transcended the realm of manipulation entirely and entered into something far more powerful and far more mysterious. The choice, as always, is yours.